Hello and welcome to Ask BR. We are going to be talking about the films of the 70s, a favorite period of mine. Harish K07 says, when I saw director Mahendran's Johnny, I felt like the film showed a transition from a stage drama to a more realistic drama. I think the whole 70s and 80s had a similar transition. What's your opinion about this? Yeah, definitely, when you look at the 70s, even the 60s filmmakers like K. Balachandar and Sridhar, they showed a very dramatic change in the way they started making their movies. You look at a movie like Azhage Unnai Aradhikkireen and compare it to something like Kadalika Neramille or anything like that. Or you look at Balachandar's Neerkumuri versus Avargal in the 70s, you see a marked change in the way certain things are. There is still drama, there is still melodrama, but there is a difference in the way that theatricality was kind of slowly vanishing. Then Singidam Srinivasa Rao, who people today mostly associate as a maker of comedies, especially Michael Madana Kamaraj, he made one of the very major movies of the 1970s called Tikkatra Parvati, which where Lakshmi played the wife of Shrikant, who's an alcoholic, and how that's about her plight. So that was a film that was thing. But even, I'm saying even films like the mainstream films like Pattina Pravesam, you had these films where there was a certain quality of, I wouldn't call it realism in the sense of actual realism, but they were definitely not theatrical. And that's a difference that you saw. There was a lot of outdoor shooting. There was a lot of, the way people spoke was a little normal. So there was something definitely happening in the 70s, and it's hard to pinpoint like any one person as, because you had like Pattina Pravesam, like I said, Tikkatra Parvati, Bhim Singh, another major, the person who made all that Pasamalar and all those movies, he made Silanerangal Silamanidargal, which is, as realistic as you can get compared to this filmmaker's work, so based on Jayakanthan's novel. So, but when we say 70s and we associate it with Bharati Raja, Mahendran, Balu Mahendra and all these people, it's mainly because there was a certain film institute trained technique that went into their films, which was not there even in these other films. There was a certain eye for cinema, there was a certain way of framing, a way of looking, a way of lensing, a way of staging, a way of performance capture, a way of lighting, that kind of really went towards defining a certain ethos, I would say. And this kind of is a very small period, because even in the 80s, it's not like they started it in the 70s and it just continued into the 80s and forever defined. Because even in the 80s and 90s, when you look at films, you don't find this kind of this artistic template that these guys had established was suddenly, became the ruling grammar for Tamil cinema or anything like that. It was seen on and off, but yeah, but that's why the 70s, you still see a lot of artifice in the movies of the 80s, in the movies of the 90s and all that. Actually, even today you see a lot of that artifice. But yeah, but 70s was when a lot of these filmmakers came together and really broke away from the theatricality of the 80s. So I know that it's just a bunch of filmmakers that have gotten identified with this, but I would also urge you to seek out films like Tikkatra Parvati and Silanerangalil Silamanidargal and Pattina Pravesam and all these films. Bhuvana Oru Kelvikuri. S.P. Muthuraman is often thought of as his major masala film director, but when you look at something like Bhuvana Oru Kelvikuri, it's a very interesting mix of a very different style. So check it out. Shiba Rajagopalan says a good number of movies in the 70s had strong female protagonists, but the industry has seen a steady decline in the importance given to female leads in the movies, to the extent that having a loose supporting heroine seems like a prerequisite to make a commercial film these days. Did the movies with female protagonists underperform, resulting in directors to gradually offer more hero-oriented? No, the movies didn't underperform, because it's just that the audiences that used to go and watch these films stopped going to the theaters and started watching films on TV. So theatrical releases typically cater to the audiences that come to theater, and as that audience became younger and younger and younger, all they seemed to want was these hero-oriented mass films where you could go and whistle and have a good time and have fun with your college students and things like that, rather than have a serious movie like with Sarita or Sujata in the lead. So that really started the decline when you kind of, because I remember even in the 80s, you have all these movies like Agni Sachi, which Shivakumar and Sarita are there, which is K. Balachandar's film. It was very viable to put out those movies. Those movies cost very little. They may not have become blockbusters, but they made kind of enough money to kind of not really sink the producer or whatever it is. One or two of them became hits. So though that trend continued, it's just that once the big hero-oriented movies started coming, it coincided with the the change of the audience profile, and that slowly kind of changed the thing as well. So you had more love stories or you had more hero-oriented movies. Kabilan says 60s were full stage set dramas and movies on Hindu mythical stories. 70s gave the relief by all these other people, even though KB started his real experiments relationship. My favorite of 70s is Aval Appaditan. Yes, of course, Aval Appaditan. When I gave that answer in the first question, I forgot to mention Aval Appaditan, Rudraya's thing. Yeah, I don't have a personal favorite of the 70s. I would say, if I had to pick, I would say Our Girl, because it's, I just love the way that film is structured. I love the way songs are used in this film. I just love that particular way this Angum Ingum song is staged, and you know, the dilemma of a woman is just shown in that. I just love the way that a woman has to choose between cruelty and kindness, and that moves me tremendously in that film. When I see a movie like Aval Appaditan, I'm like, it's a little distant for me. It's a very good movie, but that, you know, that whole Godardian stylistics, it kind of, there's a bit of a distance, which is the whole point of that. But you know, something like Our Girl, I feel very, like, I always, you know, every time I watch it, I end up being very, like, emotionally connected with it. So I think that would be my favorite film. But then I could keep naming films, you know, Aval Appaditan, Nizhal Nijamagirathu, so many films. So there's like, I just love all those films. Nenjathe Killade, that's 80. But you know, Mullum Malarum, all these films. Manoranjan says, good movies / mediocre movies ratio was better in the 70s. I honestly feel that these days, because of the sheer number of mediocre movies, the overall quality of Tamil cinema has gone down. I don't know, because when we think of the past, right, a lot of the bad stuff gets filtered out, and we remember only the good memories and the highlights. I think there was as much of a ratio of crap to good stuff than that we have now, except the volume of films has increased now because it's much easier to make films today. So the sheer volume of films makes it appear that you know, we're getting a lot more of crap films. But no, I think when you look at within that number, if you see the ratio, I think that's pretty much what was there. I don't think there's been a change in the ratio. One reason I would give that those films were a little different was because thematically there was a lot of difference, because there were a lot of films that dipped into novels or short stories and made stories, so that you had a thematic, like a lot of movies, they didn't look like one another. They weren't telling the same stories all over again. Today, because of the reliance on the hero, we've come, like, almost every movie looks the same because it's always a hero versus villain subject, as opposed to a story about relationships. So, you know, it sounds the same. Sharat Chandra says, why did the producers have a greater say in the filmmaking process? Couldn't they have let some films flourish for their passion instead of their commerce? I don't know. This is like an if only kind of question. But if you look at it, Balachandra produced a lot of his own movies. Bharati Raja had some steady producers. I think, oh, you mean why can't they have a greater say in the production process? I don't think you get too many producers with passion. I think you get more directors with passion. So the producers are basically saying, I'm going to give you X amount of money simply because your last movie was a hit and I want you to make a hit for me as well. But I think the directors were the one that said, I want to make this kind of movie. So it's their passion you're seeing instead of the producers. I don't think of any producers, external producers, I can't think of, I mean, I'm not talking about the days of, you know, Gemini Studios and all that kind of stuff. I'm not talking about those A.V. Mayappan, not that kind of mogul producers. I'm talking about the one-off individual kind of producers. I don't think they've really been there for the passion for the business. Ramchandar says, are the 70s movies so special because they were made by the first crop of directors from film universities came out? Actually, most of these directors were not from film universities, but they kind of worked with people who had come out from film universities, and so they were able to filter a lot of that world cinema knowledge from the people that they surrounded themselves with. But even then, when you look at Bharati Raja, he is really coming from Puttana Kanagal, and you know, that's a bit of an arty cinema. Only a bit though, not like terribly so. So you're kind of thinking of different level of influences, but there was just a level of naturalism and realism that the 60s cinemas didn't have, because the style of dialogue delivery, everything was so different in the 60s. When you look at 70s, even then you're still looking at movies like Vietnam Video, which was a big hit, and you're talking about Shivaji's histrionics and things like that. So it's not like that wasn't there, but it's just that side by side you had all these other films also, and they kind of changed things. Vignesh Anbaragan says, for me the special thing is the launch of several talents, Rajini, Kamal, Bharatiraja, Ilayaraja, Balu Mahendra, SP Muthuraman, etc. Favorite films, Avaloru Thodar Kadai, Aarlinda Arupathu Varai for engaging screenplays. Yeah, I think all these people were launched in the 70s, though Kamal technically was launched in the 60s, the adult Kamal maybe. SP Muthuraman again was an assistant director in the AVM films. So yeah, I think if you go back maybe a couple of generations, probably 1 or 2 generations, you might find they are very nostalgic about the 60s because it launched stars like Jayashankar and Ravichandran and all that. Actually, I have an aunt who told me once that when she was young, all the girls in her school used to have a major crush on Ravichandran, and I went like, really? So I guess it all depends on the generation that you come from also. So Rajesh DJ says, reasons why Ilayaraja realistic approach and most importantly their entertaining use of cinematic medium started in that era. Yeah, I think we've discussed that, and yeah, it's, I don't think anything can be disputed, but I don't think you can single-handedly say Ilayaraja was responsible for the 70s films. The directors were responsible for the 70s films. Ilayaraja was a major player in that era of filmmaking. Srinath Ravichandran says, special is a relative word, so I think 70s in comparison to 80s today. Was it because many of the 70s movies had a soul, had bold directors and writers, had no masala template to follow? Do you think a super deluxe would come in the 70s? Well, technically a super deluxe could not have come into the 70s because this kind of cinephilia, that kind of postmodern narrative technique and all is not, I mean, you found it in 60s in French New Wave cinema with Godard and stuff like that, but that kind of stuff would not have been possible in the 70s Tamil cinema, because Tamil cinema does not really have an art film like tradition at all. But yeah, they had a soul, that's something that because of, they didn't have that masala template. That's exactly right, because the minute you get a hero, you're saying, I want to follow like a rags to riches template, or like, something like, they'll say, the minute you say like an Annamalai, like a Basha, like a something, that means you're already basing your movie on something else. Whereas a lot of the 70s films, when you look at a Mullu Malaram, you don't really have a like or something before it, because it was so fresh and so unique. When you look at an Avargal, there's like, it just seems so like somebody's made that movie and it is so fresh and unique. You look at Abura Ragangal, you may or may not like that film, but I'm saying that kind of film has become so unique that it came out of that atmosphere when people were really bold and said, I want to make this movie. But to be fair, the cost of movie making was also a lot less. You were not pressured to kind of release a movie on 500 screens or 600,000 screens or whatever it is. You did not have this pressure of fans or everything like that. You just put out a few prints of the movie, slowly grew by word of mouth and ran for a long time before the next hit came or something. So the era was also very different. But yes, the filmmakers, I feel, did have a lot of courage in terms of experimenting new subjects. For instance, when you look at Bharatiraja's early career, he started with Padinaru Vaidyanile. You look at his subsequent films, he's making like a romantic drama like Niramarada Pookal, he's making a movie about joblessness and all that in Niralgal, he's making a movie like this melodrama about this dancer and a blind singer in Kadalovium. Again, you may or may not like these films, that's a different thing altogether, but he's not saying I'm going to make only, Padinaru Vaidyanile became a hit, so I'm only going to stick to that template. People just went wild and said, I'm going to do whatever. He made Sigapurojakal, which is a thriller. So people just made movies because the thing excited them, and that's what is missing today, because people, I think, are scared today. They're very scared that they're investing all this money, and will I get back this money? Will this hero say yes to my movie? All these other questions came in, whereas there they could just kind of do whatever movie they wanted without this fear. I think that's what's made the difference. Harish Krishna says, what significant shift have you observed in the way films are made in the 70s and the way they are made now? Do you see significant reduction in the realism which seems to have not picked up the realism? Again, you've had melodramas all through Tamil cinema, so I won't say that one bit of realism that we found in certain filmmakers has suddenly influenced Tamil cinema and everything has changed, because again, if you look in the 80s, you can point to movies like Veedu or something like that, Balu Mahendra's, and say, yeah, it's realism and all that. But that's not the dominant, aesthetic of the 80s. Just so in 90s also, you've had pretty much, very different kinds of films. So I think even today, when you see realism, it's become easier in a way. And I think that's why the coming years are going to be very interesting for Tamil cinema, because we are seeing once again that era where you are not pressured by the need to have a hero. You have streaming platforms that are going to form a significant amount of your revenue. So the amount of movie that you have to get from theaters goes down like proportionately. So then you can be a little experimental with your subjects. So I'm hoping that this will create a business model that will make it possible for people to follow different kinds of films. Murali Krishna asks, 70s special because deeply rooted with great writing on relations. Since we had less access to technology, writers and directors were giving importance to script. The writers grew up without much distraction by reading many books which helped them make classics. That's one thing that I truly agree. The minute you have a book that you're basing a script on, you have that basic core that is so different, and then you develop it however you want. But here, I don't know, it's just we've lost that tradition of making books into movies. So it just makes, instead of relying on books, people look at earlier movies and then say, I want a movie like that, or they take it from the movies instead of taking it from books, which are always so much. I mean, I've really never understood that, because books are all around us. What is stopping people from taking a story and adapting it? I don't know. Meera says, the issues these films dealt with weren't larger than life but derived from life itself. Do you believe the reality drive was the most enriching aspect of the 70s films? What makes these films so powerful and progressive that some of them remain remarkably relevant even today? One thing I really like about the 70s films is that they're so quiet. Today you have these, if a movie was set in a village, you actually heard that peaceful, as in, you always felt that peace and in the surroundings and all that. Today movies are relentless in terms of how they use background score. They're very scared to make you relax for even a minute, because then somebody will say, padathla lag irukku, and then that's it. Then they'll kind of, get scared about whether the audience is going to switch off or not. But that quietness is something that I miss a lot in the movies. There's, like, if somebody's crossing the road or something like that, you'll just hear the honking of traffic or whatever it is in a very little thing, and they'll actually be crossing the road. You won't hear some major dramatic music or something like that. That realism was something else. The heroines and the heroes look like real people. We may laugh at the bell bottoms and the Nilex saris or whatever it is today, but that's what people wore. The people on screen were wearing things that real life people were wearing. Whereas today, everyone is expected to look like they have a costume designer. They don't look, even if they say de-glamorized, they're wearing very color coordinated dresses and things like that. You look at Pataphat Jayalakshmi or Shobha and Mullum Malarum, or you look at Sujata and Avaloru Thodarkadai, they look like they took the wardrobe from a middle class person's home. They don't look like somebody designed that for them. So all that helped to add to that realism that we are seeing real people on screen. Adrian David says, John Abrams' Agrarathil Kadai, best known for its avant-garde filmmaking and leftist undertones, is a film that deserves to be celebrated. Also, he openly acknowledged his source of inspiration, Saturno, is underappreciated. Please enlighten us further on the film. I did not see this film for the longest time. I've only heard of it until 2 or 3 years ago at the Mumbai Film Festival, at the Mami Film Festival, when they had a screening of Agraharathil Kadai. And I wrote this in my piece. When I wrote about it, I thought it was so ironic that I was watching this micro-budget film sitting in a PVR where seats cost some $1,200 or something, because I think Mumbai has this gold class or something like that, So just like, but I had a pass and I was sitting there, and it was a truly revolutionary film, because it's not a narrative film. It's a bit of a non-narrative film. It's got a very basic narrative. If you want, you can call it Bressonian, because like Ahasa, Balthazar, you're talking about a donkey that is basically being used to kind of reflect on the people around it. And I think it was too avant-garde for the people of its time. Because even today, if somebody made a movie like that and you release it in maybe 1 or 2 theaters in Chennai, I don't know if people will watch it, because you're talking about somebody experimenting with cinema. We still watch movies that, as in Tamil audiences, we still watch movies where stories are told. Within that story being told, if we have certain little bits of experimentation, we're okay with it. But you still have people saying very basic things like, I didn't feel anything, this movie didn't touch me emotionally, or the supporting characters they're not playing a major part, or very childish things like that. So you still have that kind of an audience here. So I think this kind of thing would never have worked today, much less then. So that's all the questions we have in this Ask BR from a decade that's very close to my heart. So thank you so much for tuning in, and see you in the next episode of Ask BR, and keep watching Film Companion South.